Hello everyone. In today's video, I'm going to be reviewing Frankenstein Meets the Wolf-Man from 1943. This is the fifth movie of the Universal Monster Frankenstein series, and it's also a sequel and a follow-up to the first Wolfman film from 1941. Before the MCU movies and the DC Extended Universe, this was probably the first movie to start the whole cinematic universe and the whole versus and crossover movies. Because if not for this movie, you would not have films like Godzilla vs. King Kong, Freddy vs. Jason, Alien vs. Predator, and Batman vs. Superman. Frankenstein Meets the Wolf-Man was released on March 12, 1943. The film was directed by Roy William Neill, it was produced by George Wagner, and the screenplay was done by Kurt Zodmick. Again, I'm not sure if I'm saying his name right. The film stars Lon Chaney Jr., Bela Lugosi, Ilona Massey, Patrick Knowles, Lionel Atwell, and Maria Ospunskaya. Again, sorry if I did not say those names right, at least I'm trying, and I hope I did not butcher them to death. In Frankenstein Meets the Wolf-Man, Lawrence Talbot has risen from the grave again, and he's still cursed as a werewolf. He has desires to get rid of his werewolf curse. He thinks that death is his answer, but only thinks that Dr. Frankenstein can help cure his werewolf curse. But then he finds out that Dr. Frankenstein's been dead for a few years. And then he thinks that Frankenstein's daughter Elsa could help him. And he finds the Frankenstein monster. As usual, before I delve into my personal opinion about this film, here is my DVD/Blu-Ray collection of the Frankenstein Meets the Wolf-Man. First time I saw the film was on this double feature DVD of Frankenstein Meets the Wolf-Man, House of Frankenstein. I'm not gonna lie, I love the artwork on this DVD double feature. It's pretty cool to look at. Looks like something out of a comic book in a way. And around the mid-2000s, when my dad found out they were coming out with DVD sets of the monsters, Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman came on the Wolfman Universal Monster Collection series. I'm not sure why it was not in the Frankenstein Universal Monster Collection. My theory on that may be because Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman is a semi-like sequel to the Wolfman in a way before, with the monster being thrown at the last minute, in the last half. But the good news, for some reason, Universal was able to release a double feature of both the films on both the Frankenstein and Universal Monster Blu-ray set. Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman is one of my favorite of the Universal Monster movies, and it's also one of my favorite crossover versus films. This is the first movie that got me into versus and crossover movies. My favorite part and the highlight of this film is obviously the finale when the Frankenstein monster and the Wolfman finally fight and face each other. As a little kid, I used to skip over the DVD to watch that scene, and sometimes occasionally I'd watch it on YouTube just for the fun of it. I like it when they're fighting, the monster growls. That always giggles me for some reason every time I watch the fight scene when the monster growls at the Wolfman. Even though this is one of my favorite of the Universal Monster movies and the Frankenstein series, I'll admit the film does have its flaws at times in the film, which I'll cover in a little while. For instance, the Frankenstein continuity is really way off in this film compared to the Wolfman continuity is pretty good and solid, because it really is a follow-up to the Wolfman, whether or not is this another reboot or sequel to Frankenstein. Because this movie is a semi-sequel to the Wolfman for the first half, and then a Frankenstein movie at the end of the half of the rest of the film. Once again, Lon Chaney Jr. in this film, just like in the first Wolfman film, great, fantastic, spectacular, sad, and tragic. We really sympathize with him because we really want his scene to be cured and free of his werewolf curse, so that we can go back to being a normal person and having a normal life. Lawrence Talbot thinks that death is his only way to be cured and free of his werewolf curse and to bring peace. But then he realized that Dr. Frankenstein could be the help for his werewolf curse cure, but only to find out that Dr. Frankenstein's been dead for years. Which kind of like begs the question, like, which Frankenstein are they talking about? Are they talking about Wolf Frankenstein, Ludwig Frankenstein, or Henry Frankenstein from the first two Frankenstein films? Again, the continuity is a little bit off right here about which Frankenstein we're talking about. One thing I like about this film is that we got to see like a transformation scene. We sort of did see that in the first film, but we only saw like Lawrence Talbot's legs in the first movie. Where in this film, you actually saw like his face transform. There's a scene where Lawrence Talbot is lying in bed in the hospital. A full moon rises. And the way they did this back in the 1940s, unlike in the 80s or modern day like werewolf transformations where it was 80s special effects done by Rick Baker, or like modern day like CGI. Lon Chaney Jr. sat in the bed and they applied the makeup like slowly and did trick photography one by one. Just imagine how Lon Chaney had to sit in that bed for hours. It was probably very exhausting at that point. Besides the fight scenes that I like between the Wolfman and the monster, I also love the melodrama between Lawrence Talbot and Gypsy Maleva, as if they have like a son and mother bonding a little bit in the movie until a certain point. It could have been nice to have had like more scenes like that. At the same time, it would have made the film a little bit too long. It would have not had much more to the story to it, what's about to come between the Wolfman and the Frankenstein monster fighting at the end of the film. It would have been nice to have had more scenes like that in the movie, but at the same time, it would have been a little bit too long. It also brings me to one of my questions of the movie. What happened to Gypsy Maleva at the end of the movie when she disappears before the fight happens between the monster and the werewolf? Where did she go? Bela Lugosi plays the monster in this movie. I mean, he's okay. I mean, he's not that he's bad or great. He's just okay. He's a little bit of an upgrade compared to Lon Chaney Jr. It's just very crazy and ironic how that he turned down the monster a decade prior, and a decade later he played the monster in this movie. And he has since then regretted turning down the Frankenstein monster in the first film that Karloff played. He's no Boris Karloff, but he just does an okay, decent job. Nothing spectacular the way Karloff did it as the Frankenstein monster. This is going to come as a bit of a surprise, but despite how we all know Karloff is so iconic as the monster, the part where Bela Lugosi's Frankenstein monster in this film is walking around blind like a zombie, it's kind of surprising. This is exactly where that whole stereotype started, being imitated by modern day horror fans and moviegoers. Was this movie, not Boris Karloff's Frankenstein. I know, hard to believe that, because when people think of Frankenstein being blind, walking around as a zombie, think that was Karloff. No, that was Lugosi in this film, is where the inspiration, the stereotype came from. When you think about it, Bela Lugosi was 6 years old around the time when this movie was being made. He's very frail as the monster, and he's really at a downfall at this point in his career. He was really desperate for work and money at this point in his life. When you look at Bela Lugosi's biography, it's kind of a very sad and tragic story how you had this actor who played Dracula, and then he was typecast, not really given respect by Universal. And after being typecast, he was addicted to morphine at the end of his career and in life. And when he did the Ed Wood films back in the 50s, he was really desperate for money and work to be in movies. It's just so sad and tragic how Universal really ruined his life. In the fight scenes between the monster and the Wolfman, you can tell that that's not Bela Lugosi doing the stunt scenes and fight choreographs, because it's obvious that Bela Lugosi was 60 years old, and there's no way he could have done like a fighter stunt scene choreographed like that. As I mentioned how, like, Bela Lugosi's performance as the monster in this movie was an upgrade compared to Lon Chaney Jr. in Ghost of Frankenstein. They almost, like, wanted Lon Chaney Jr. to do both monsters. That would have been interesting, but it probably would have been too much of a hassle, too much of a big budget issue, trying where you do, like, the scenes with him as the Wolfman, then do the scenes with him as the monsters. It would have been too much, and plus they would not have gotten away with it back then, like, not like they do now these days with, like, the CGI and stuff. When you stop to think about it for a minute, it makes sense for Bela Lugosi to be playing the monster in this film, especially after when the brains were switched between Igor and the monster, and throughout the rest of the series of the Universal Monster Frankenstein films, it was basically Igor's brain, the monster, being the monster throughout the entire series. It's interesting to read about how, like, originally there were supposed to be scenes where the monster had dialogue, telling Lawrence Talbot what happened in the last movie, Ghost of Frankenstein. But unfortunately, Universal Studios cut those scenes out for certain reasons. One of the reasons is because at the time when this movie was being made, it was during World War II. Universal Studios was worried about how audiences would find that, like, too disturbing and too similar to Adolf Hitler wanting to rule the world, what the monster said in the movie. It could have been interesting to have those scenes in the film, but unfortunately, those scenes today are no longer around. Those scenes are considered lost. If they found Thomas Edison's 1910 Frankenstein, there still could be a chance they may find those scenes of the monster talking in this film. Because it'd be interesting to have those scenes in the film to see, like, what the monster said to Lawrence Talbot, and it'd also be pretty interesting to have for a restored film that really could be an exception. Then again, we have to keep forgetting this was the 1940s. No such thing as, like, home media, VHS tapes, or DVD bonus features. And also, back in the 1940s, when they burned films or scenes from a movie, they weren't thinking at the time about, like, what the future of, like, home media would be at that time, of, like, DVDs, Blu-rays, VHS tapes, etc., or online internet stuff. No one can predict the future. One thing I also, like, want to point out in this film, I've noticed a lot in these Universal Monster films, the way they recycle actors. Lionel Atwill once again is in this movie as a different character. He plays the mayor. In Son of Frankenstein, he played an inspector. In Ghost of Frankenstein, he plays a scientist. And also, half of the actors from, like, the Wolfman are in this film, except for Evelyn Ankers. She played Ludwig Frankenstein's daughter, Elsa, in Ghost of Frankenstein. And yet she's played by different actors in this film. And I wonder, how come she didn't come back for this movie? Is it because she didn't have the best, like, working relationship with Lon Chaney when she made the Wolfman, or she just wasn't interested? I don't know. Patrick Knowles, who plays the fiancé in the Wolfman, plays Dr. Frank Mannering. I wonder if he's called Dr. Frank as if, like, Dr. Frankenstein. Basically, that's what he is, the Dr. Frankenstein of the film. The work gets to him and he becomes obsessed with it. He brings the monster back to life. But he's such, like, a jerk and a moron, though, in this film, and a prick. Let's just say he wasn't smart enough to bring the monster back to life, and yet he's a doctor. Also, once again, Dwight Frye's in this film as one of the villagers. I feel like at this point with the Universal Monster movies, they really were not caring about continuity, or not even thinking for a second about how, like, this actor played this character in the last film, and yet they're playing a different character. Just shows that not all, like, It just shows that not all doctors and scientists are as smart as they think they are. So despite the flaws of this movie, this is one I still find fun, entertaining, and excited to watch every time. And I still get excited to rewatch it anytime I get a chance. I just love the idea of, like, two monster horror icons fighting each other. So that was my review of Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. Stay tuned for my next review of House of Frankenstein.